Hi guys, and welcome. Hopefully this one is working. To this call. Let's speak on it. Am I frozen?
Um, Not from my end.
No.
Well, you are
All right.
now. Uh,
Okay, as long as you can hear me, that's good. Welcome everybody. Go ahead and like and share up this stream. As we're here now, we're gonna start off with some introductions. So, of course, you all will remember Janet from last week, the
Hi.
Mickey Chronicles, um, poet and author, you know, and now editor. So welcome Janet to the screen. Of course, remember Poppy Show from Poppy Show JA. Everybody knows Poppy. Big up yourself, Poppy Show. And we have Clive Williams in the building tonight. I'm going to ask Janet to go ahead and give Clive a proper introduction for me.
Okay, so dear Mr. Williams here is the founder of Where It's At magazine. He's a publisher also, and he has 15 years in hypnotherapy business, and he's counseled families and folks on issues all over. So he is going to be technically our voice of reason in the season. Given, oh God, I'm rhyming, not on purpose, but or definite voice of reason, and of course, the one with perspective and giving us a different viewpoint from a therapist's point of view in terms of relationships and how they work. Thank you so much, Mr. Williams, for taking the time out to join us in this endeavor.
It's my pleasure. It's long overdue. Long overdue.
Absolutely. So before we even dive deeper in our day, which is my mother, I am my mother's daughter, I am my mother's son. I'm gonna let Janet go ahead and give us a little backstory on her anthropology.
Well, the anthology that we mentioned last week it's a collection of short stories about and it's such a short recap of last week's show. We talked about I am my father's daughter, I am my father's son, and we talked about our father-daughter relationships and how certain aspects of those relationships affect our adult life. We were joined by Mr. Williams' son, Chris, who definitely gave us a great perspective on having a um, a well-rounded father in the household, teaching different things. Shara and I, of course, had our own different relationships. So last week you had a different perspective when it comes to father-daughter relationships and father-son relationships. And so this week we are doing I am my mother's daughter, and so you can jump into our segment since we're running a little bit behind right now.
All right, perfect. Again, thank everybody for joining us on the stream. If you can like and share the stream, please. This is going to be a very interesting conversation to be a part of. So before we get any further, I just want to have a little bit of a conversation, if you will, with Mr. Williams. So if you could tell us a little bit about the magazine before we get started, a little bit about the magazine mission for the magazine.
Sure. Where It's At has been around for 18 years, and the the entire thinking behind the birth of Where It's At was that my family and I, my son, my wife, my partner, Annette, my wife Michelle, we all got together and try to figure out how we could create a platform for the Caribbean American community, a platform that would begin to re-image us as Caribbean folks in the diaspora. And I say reimage because traditionally we have not been responsible for creating our own image. Our images are created by others. And I thought we should have a hand in creating our image. And, we come from a sunshiny place. We come from a place with a lot of vibes, a lot of energy. And so whatever we did, we want that to be reflected in whatever platform we provided for our community. And so, if you could hark back 20 years ago, uh, when you saw a picture appear in the Daily News or the Post or whatever with a black person, it was almost a blur. You couldn't differentiate the person's nose from their lips or so forth, as long as it's a black person. Well, there are a lot of things to blame for that. For one, the entire construction of cameras. And I just want your audience to know that it was not designed for the dark skin. It's just now that there is a new evolution in the design of cameras because more and more people of color are showing up and showing up in important places and showing up saying important things, so that the real image process has to be addressed by the powers that be. But before they decided to do that, we in Where It's At decided that we are going to work on re-imaging our community. And so Where It's At was born as a platform to provide our local community, our Caribbean American diaspora, with information and also entertainment. And that was essentially the concept behind Where It's At.
Thank you so much for that. If you guys are Where It's At Magazine, guys, you can also follow them on IG and also their YouTube page as well, to get familiar with this Black owned business, guys. Support Black business. I'm going to let Janet go ahead and recap a little bit of what we did last week before we jump into tonight's show.
Sure.
So last week was, as I mentioned before, I Am My Father's Daughter. We definitely talked about different relationships with that. I also mentioned my anthology that I'm working on, and I collected about 20 something stories from different women from all over the world, that shared with me, different aspects of their relationships with their fathers. And so that will be published in the upcoming year, hopefully sometime this year. I'm working on the cover right now. So that's it. Of course, as I said, Chris joined us. Chris is Mr. Williams' son. And, we all gave our varying perspectives of, our relationship with our fathers and how that definitely, affect us now. And, in the future, just the kind of a recap of that. But it was a good show. You can check the link out on either of our pages to see what the show was like and just to catch up.
Absolutely. So let's get into tonight's show. So normally, most shows start out with a pretty side of relationship because it is what people like to see. But what about the underbelly of motherhood? So there are good mothers and we celebrate them constantly. But what about the mothers who make decisions that negatively affect children? So let's talk about it a little bit more. What happens to those children and their adult lives? So I want us to talk a little bit, and I'm going to go back and forth between Clive and Poppy to kind of talk about what is the importance of a parent-child relationship. Before we get into mother or daughter, like what is the importance of a parent-child relationship? And I'm going to go ahead and start off with Clive.
One of the unfortunate things about how our lives have evolved as Black folks, not just in the diaspora, but in whatever country we live, is that the advisory model, the counseling model that has been established for us is Eurocentric. And so the Freudian, the Jungian concepts, the psychology of these two men, William James, it's their psychology that drives how relationships are perceived. I'm here saying, as a preamble, before anything else, we had better be responsible for how we begin to study and review the relationships and the dynamics of the Black family, because it is an entirely different kettle of fish from the white family and the Eurocentric family. For example, in the society in which I grew up, and I will just share what my mother. So I'm jumping the gun. What my mother was like. I grew up in a very strong mother-son relationship. A relationship with my mother gave me tremendous confidence. My mother was a strong woman. And whether one considers that a fortunate or unfortunate situation, I have emerged as a male that is heterosexual. Other males have emerged as queer individuals. The question is, what is the causative factors that create the dynamics between mother and son that determines whether that son, one, eh, how that son is going to deal with life and the challenges of life, how that son is going to deal with relationships. And unfortunately, we have not been the subjects of any kind of study, serious study, that can predict the outcomes. All I can rely on is the experiences that I've had. And the experiences that I've had in with a Jamaican background, a Caribbean background, is that our societies have been influenced by women in such a profound way, yet women don't get credit for the tremendous job that they do, given the few resources they had to do that job. And my mother left school what would be considered now about the eighth grade, and yet her penmanship, her scholarship in terms of reading and writing was comparable to someone who had gone to college. So that mother imbued in me and shared with me a love for reading, writing, and thinking, to the extent that that mother at no time indicted me when I refused to go to church or when I refused to take part in what was considered a traditional activity. Now, this might sound a little bit sophisticated to some people who are from Jamaica like myself, but I can just share my experience. My mother guided me. When I asked questions that were difficult to answer, my mom would find a book and she would sit with me and we'd go over that particular issue and we would hash it out until I had begun to at least understand, began to at least comprehend the very basics. So for me, when I saw when my dad was shaken by illness, when his confidence was shaken by business failure, it was my mom who rose to the occasion and kept him straight. So having seen that, you can understand how difficult it is for me to see mothers not assuming the role that is so essential in the development of boy or girl. But the Oedipus complex talks about the boy aligning with a mother and the daughter aligning with a father. That kind of complexity I never experienced. I experienced a totally different relationship with my dad from the one I experienced with my mother. Both were powerful influences on my life. I'll stop at this point because you might want to ask me a more direct question as to, as to how, how it molded me.
Oh, we will. I'm gonna let Coffee Show get to jump in now and kind of just talk about what the importance of the parent-child relationship, because I know you have a strong bond with your mom. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, most definitely. So, very different from what Clive's experience was, my mom, like Clive's mom, she dropped out of school from a very young age, but she never gone on to get that, handwriting college level kind of, I mean, it pretty much was because of her circumstances that caused that. So I grew up seeing a mother or a household that I knew that as the first boy in the family, I had to come and, try to make ends meet no matter how hard, no matter what the circumstances were. I knew that failure wasn't an option. I never faulted my parents for anything because, as I said, where we're coming from, resources were very limited, and we pretty much relied heavily on just natural talents to get us out. You know what I'm saying? But I see where, a mother tried so hard to make things happen as as best as she could, in a world where we still try to look like what the world wants us to look like. And for that, it kind of shaped me, to start understanding that although I was a kid, I had to appease or relieve some of the stresses from her. There were times when, for example, there were class parties and maybe she couldn't afford. And I would have to, just sit back in myself and say, sure, I don't want to go nowhere, just to take off that burden off of her, she's having to provide. Or, and mind you, it was a household of mommy and daddy. So I'm talking about both parties coming together, but it still wasn't happening financially, emotionally, all different aspects of things. But I was extremely close with my mother because my father, no fault of his either. He was more of just to get up and go kind of. The mothers are more emotional, them cater to the feelings. So I saw where my mother was saddened a lot by the circumstances, and I had to just stick by her, shun some of my own pleasures just so that she could say, okay, he's not wanting that, so I don't have to be burdened by. And it caused me, as a man, to really step up my game, you know what I mean? Where it comes down to my kid's mother, which is my wife, but I want to use the term as their mother, to make sure that, they will never have to turn to a mother for that level of strength. And if they do, she is able to provide that strength, but daddy is, like a cover. That's what my mother passed off on me, that I became such a man that a mother's role was so much of just being a mother. A father will be a mother and a father in terms of I will still provide love. I will do all the emotional. I will do finance. I will do sports. I will do, you know what I mean? All that kind of stuff. And that's what I got from my mother, the bond that I shared with my mother. It was just so much of the nurturing side of that woman coming on to me, and also that physical side of my father being there. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
I have so much more to talk about. I can go on and on, but I'll just leave it right there for now. But
This,
that's what I gathered from my mother, as a kid coming up.
can I tell you that this week, as opposed to next week, it's a whole different it's a whole different mood this week.
Mhm.
But welcome to everybody on the stream, and we're just getting into the thick of the conversation. And I'm just gonna get you guys view on this as well. Let's talk a little bit about the negative side. Mothers who abuse their children are used to take out their pain from their father on their children. Now, we see a lot of that in our society. We see a lot of, if the father walks out on the child, and the mother sometimes becomes abusive to the child, especially if the child look like the father. Oh gosh, man, it starts to be very abusive to that child. Can we talk a little bit about that and how it impacts that child, psychologically, even in school and stuff like that? Can we talk a little bit about that?
Sure, sure. I saw that quite a bit. Uh, you know, it's such a difficult subject to get around because where do you start? Is where does it begin? The mother who clearly takes out all her emotional burdens and stress on a child, and who mirrors the father and the child is obviously overburdened mentally. This is somebody who needs support. The problem is that in our society and in our culture, the support system is not there. And eventually, these things have to be legally sorted out. It gets to the point where mothers literally commit crimes of abuse on their children, which gets into the legal arena without any sort of resolution of the mother's emotional problems, emotional issues. Uh, it is a problem, and it is very systemic in a lot, not just in Black communities, across the board. And I've seen problems resembling that, where, for example, the mother, an ambitious, driven mother, will get up and go find opportunity elsewhere just to ensure that sometime in the future her children are going to be taken care of, not knowing that that is also compounding the psychology of the child. And I'll give you an example, which sort of harmonizes both concerns that we have. I saw a mother in my practice who had left Jamaica, came to America to seek an opportunity to improve her family, the lot of her family. But the son and the daughter that she left behind was left behind with aunts and uncles, and they were older. And their behaviors, we don't know what they were, but what it did was after a few years, made the children feel what? Totally abandoned. They couldn't conceptualize that mom had left in their best interest. They couldn't see 5 years down the road that mom's intent was to get them eventually and find a place for them so that she could improve their lives. And on top of that, her bitterness because she was the only one fighting for the family. The bitterness and the anger arose to the point where she started to poison the children that the dad is no good. How do we how do we resolve issues like that? We can only do so when we see people. And what you're doing, what you ladies are doing, is incredible, because what this does, it begins when people see this, they begin to say to themselves, does my problem need resolution? Maybe I had better find a way to begin to address this, because these kinds of emotional burdens hamper people's emotional, physical, mental, spiritual health in such a way that people literally lose their minds. So I think what we're doing is somewhat instructive to people who might be watching and listening. We need help. A study was done in Jamaica I think it was about 10 years ago. At the time, Professor Hicklin was responsible for this. And the study unearthed the fact that 40% of Jamaicans, and this is in general terms, are having some kind of mental, emotional, unresolved issue, which speaks to the fact that we, as a community, as a people, we need help. Where do we turn for that help? And hopefully the fact that we are digital, which wasn't happening 20 years ago, means that we're reaching more people, we're unearthing these problems, and we hopefully we'll find a way when people reach out to us and we reach out to them that we can begin to resolve some of these problems.
I just have
Absolutely.
one question. You said something and it kind of like triggered a question for me. Um, do you think equipping parents, mothers who, leave their children for better opportunities, who know these opportunities are better, do you think that equipping those parents with the right tools to have that conversation with the child, do you think that will help the level of abandonment that kids feel later on? Because the upping and leaving and saying, the lack of communication, not knowing how to communicate certain things, it doesn't necessarily help the way they see it. And so do you think finding ways to kind of educate parents who are embarking on this kind of a journey, I don't know, finding the parents, do you think when you find them, for argument's sake, you have a family that's leaving and they need to have this conversation, do you think having the conversation with the child makes a difference or could make a difference in their life?
It certainly can make a difference depending on the age and the maturity of the child, obviously, and it's going to make a difference also if other members of the family are together, who can ensure and in some way guarantee the support for the
Okay.
child. But the one of the saving grace of this whole conversation is that children are very resilient. Children are remarkably resilient, and if they are caught in time, if the mother or the parents, whoever is involved in the raising of that child, is aware enough to get that child help in time, yes, that child can be rescued. It will leave some residual damage. It always does. But
Mm-hmm.
that child will at least be able to rationalize, and that's where you want them to be. At least rationalize why mom or dad abandoned them.
I mean, I kind of have a thought on this too, because I feel like, when we talk about the whole, because we're essentially talking about for lack of a better term, the barrel kids are that sort back home. Because you have a lot of parents that leave, go on farm work, leaving their kids with, relatives and stuff like that. And more focus is placed on the material stuff. And again, that's based on how they grew up as a child as well, how they view parenting as well, because they learn that from how they grow up. Because for a lot of people, parenting is providing. And when I say providing, it's not providing emotional support, it's not providing those non-tangible stuff. It's providing money. It's making sure that you eat. It's making sure that you have clothes to put on. We somehow neglect that emotional side, those things that we can't touch and feel, that later on when we grow up in life, we're like, oh my God, I didn't have this as a child growing up. I didn't feel this love. I didn't know that mommy didn't tell me I love you. Daddy didn't tell me I love you. And when we grow up, we're like, oh my God. And we grow up with so many issues, and we don't even know we have issues until we're a parent ourselves. We're oh my God, I have a problem. I don't know if there's a way to curb that, even with having a conversation sometimes as a child growing up, mommy is going away for the better. You're there saying, God, I want my mom here. I need to talk to my mom about this. I need to talk to my dad about this. Like the way how you navigate life kind of changes when they're not around, even though they're going away for the better.
Sure,
So
let me let me maybe Papa Show wants to jump in first and say something.
Well, real quick, based on what Shaw was saying, obviously I was out for a little while because of the Wi-Fi situation. But where I'm from, you see, we have a situation where so so much of us as kids, cousins and nieces, nephews, everybody spend all this time in one yard. When mommy gone to work or daddy gone to work or whatever the situation is, we're so reliant on grandma sometimes. We don't even miss mommy and daddy, man. Whilst you can perceive that as an issue for a child coming up, when it becomes the culture for our family, it's really not an issue, you know. It is really not. Sometimes it's so different when mommy is at home. Sometimes we say, mommy say, stop doing this and stop doing that. And we're like, why if mommy did that work? You know what I mean? We could have go up on the road, go play some ball, go this, go that. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I understand where it can be an issue where mommy and daddy was always solely there. But when you were brought up in an environment where a grandma sometime or an auntie sometime or the neighbor sometimes it becomes a part of you and it is what you have to deal with and you know what I mean, it make you who you are today. You know what I mean? So that's just my 2 cents on that little situation.
But then that's part of the conditioning, though. It's like we're
Yeah.
so it's a conditioning to think that that situation is okay. When in truth, later on you're saying, "Oh my God, maybe having the extended family parent me wasn't necessarily what I needed at that time. I did need to have a child, my mother there in certain regards, and I can see where on one hand, like you are saying, it still didn't make a difference because you had an adult in the picture. You had someone there who wasn't necessarily a mother or a father, but definitely, a role model of some sort.
Well, you know what, also, I'm glad that you touched that point because we were brought up that way. I was talking to one of my brethren recently who, from a total different side of the island, were brought up similar. Mind you, about probably 75% of the population know them kind of lifestyle. He was brought up similar. Now we're in America, and we are saying to ourselves that we wish if our kids would have probably get exposed to some of the lifestyle because they would have been a little more rougher on the outside. You know what I mean? These kids are so sheltered. You say something to them, they start crying, teary-eyed, all this kind of stuff, and you be like, really? You know, so it really, really cultivates a little side of you that we need, you know what I mean? Because the world is a rough place out there. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Granted, some aunties, some grandma, some stepmom treat you like hell, yes. But sometimes not money ushering you for every situation is not so bad. You know? Sometimes you need a little harshness about you coming up, you know what I mean? Because the world is very different. We know how it is outside, and sometimes being too soft is not what you want to be in today's world. You know what I mean? It's definitely not what you want to be.
I agree with you. Before we continue, let me just acknowledge everybody in the chat. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have an opinion on the topic or anything, please go ahead and drop it in the chat. Clive, go ahead.
You know, I think you raise a good point. You know, Papa Show. Uh, it has to be a balance, huh? I wish that, for example, my grandsons had a little bit of growing up in Jamaica.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of easy here. They're not seeing the clash of culture. They're not seeing the rough and tumble of life. And they're not seeing it in an organic situation as we saw it when we were growing up in Jamaica. But for the sake of this conversation, I would like us to contextualize it, right? Are we looking at the Jamaican society the way we grew up? Or are we fast forwarding and looking at this society now as to how children are growing up? In what context do we want to place this particular conversation? Because one informs the other, right? And so when I referred to my growing up, I hope I'm not out of sync with what you guys have in mind. How I grew up in Jamaica and how I see children growing up here are two different things because the constraints on the level of discipline one can administer in this society is totally different from the discipline that one can administer in the society from which we come, which is all part of the the growing up, the development of children. Now, look, if you were to ask me to give you a straight up answer as to whether my mom whooped my tail unapologetically, I'm going to tell you that she did.
Without
It has
hesitation.
it has done absolutely no harm to my psyche.
None.
Okay, it kept me straight. And so the point that Poppy Show raised about toughening up is a very valid point. The
Mhm.
only thing that countermands that is there has to be a balance, right?
Definitely.
And where do we strike this balance? Look, the same way, right? Developing countries like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, whatever, can marshal the resources to launch a literacy drive to ensure that their people, their constituents, learn to read and write up to a level of 80 or 90%, which are some desired levels. Why aren't we in the Caribbean, in light of the serious psychological and mental issues we're having, why aren't governments interested in launching that same kind of campaign for people's mental health?
So,
Look, government has a role. You and I can psychoanalyze what the situation is right here, and we can try to find solutions. But we must hold our governments also responsible for the people and their mental, spiritual, physical outcomes. Government has a responsibility. The same way they can initiate a drive to teach people how to read and write, they can begin to address the social, psychological needs and psychological needs of our communities. So I think one of the efforts we can make as a group is begin in our own ways to lobby uh, our various governments, wherever you're from, whether it's from Trinidad or Jamaica, to begin to look seriously at the mental health issues in our country. You and I know, even from this, with the outbreak of this virus, that mental health, physical health outcomes are the determinants of wealth. The economy stops when we're not healthy.
Yeah.
So the same way, when we're not mentally healthy, not it doesn't only affect the economy, it affects the entire fabric of social life. Families are ruined, entire families are ruined then and in the future.
True. My goodness, we're getting deep.
no, but you touch on a lot of good points when it comes to mental health. And I mean, when we start in the community from a level of mothers or daughters and sons, that kind of relationship, there's a lot of hurt there. There's going to always be something that requires mending and how we function in society. Because the family is the foundation of who we are. They're the first people we know, they're the first people we get to see. And so I feel like if we're gonna start a mental health campaign, it has to be like an overhaul social campaign where societies also, you know, taking into consideration the stereotypes attached to mental health. And that's one of the biggest things that we have to cut back on. Is not just to look at you having a mental problem, you being a full-blown crazy person with a chemical imbalance. It doesn't necessarily stop there or start there. So society has to reprogram itself to understand that, you know, all these issues that we have aren't necessarily something that's going to put us in a state of, you know, chaos every single time. You can have a mental health issue and it's not something that's really going to decapitate you for the entire rest of your life. So I love that we're addressing a lot of these homey issues because being a daughter, you know, of a mother daughter relationship is always something that's trying, for lack of a better word.
Mhm.
It's always trying because,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, your mother is trying to create this human that society would accept and appreciate and, you know, create a family and do these things. At the same time, the daughter is like, let me live my life. Exhibit A. Not that my mother is doing that, but mother like people tend to kind of pressure you into having those kind of things. And I'm just gonna not like look at your face because you're having facial expressions that I will not address tonight. I refuse to address.
Here's where cultures come in.
Right.
It's amazing. I find uh, in our culture, the Jamaican culture, which I speak, and even in the American culture, I've been here for 30 years, so I'm now steeped in this culture. Parents fail to acknowledge, one, that children are human.
Mm-hmm.
They're human beings. So what am I talking about when I say that? How many parents have you ever heard acknowledge the fact that their children are human and they are just little bitty humans who need to be treated? How do you treat another human being? Right? You do deferentially. You respect that person's point of view, don't you? You listen to that person. So where does it start? Are we listening to our children? Are we treating them like persons that have an opinion?
I
And
guess.
so
I guess. Go ahead.
it's not a rhetorical question. Yeah.
I want to say one thing right there, because I guess when it comes down to like, viewing kids as, humans or whatever, I think a lot of parents are of the opinion that they should not have an opinion
Yes.
because
See,
of their age. They have their opinion.
And this is what my mother always said. Speak when you're spoken to and answer when you're called.
there you go.
Don't
So can
skip
I
that line. Speak
let
when
me
you're
let me
spoken
get
to and answer when you're called.
let me get really serious now. Let me get really serious. Uh, we come from a society that needs to work on loving, caring. I don't want to go off on the deep end and say we come from an unloving society. I'm just going to say in parenthesis that we come from a society that needs for us to learn to love. Hmm? The optics is that when you look at Jamaica, we are relentless, tough, hardworking people. But at the same time, we're leaving something on the table. We're leaving compassion, empathy, and love. And if you look at that society, how it's balkanized, how different fragments, elements of the community are in one, very much beginning to resemble, well, American society is beginning to resemble Jamaican society now. But what I'm getting at is the fact that our society, as we grew up in Jamaica, had no room for anyone that was different. We are not open-minded. So if a society is largely closed-minded, then the opportunity for improvement in both mental and physical health is a challenge. Where do we begin with our children? I believe that we have an opportunity when mothers go to the hospitals to have their babies is one of the biggest opportunities for us to begin to deal with a mental health issue. And why do I say that? Because I don't know what the percentage is now, but I know it's a very high percentage of mothers who have problems after they deliver their first or their second child. Hmm?
Mhm.
And these problems are not considered even by some of the medical profession as issues to be dealt with immediately. Now that mom goes into that depression after having that child, obviously she's going to transfer that depression or project that depression to the child, and she's going to project that depression to others in the family. Have we considered that in any mental health model that has been staged for our communities to understand? When you were growing up as young ladies and as a young man, Poppy Show, in Jamaica, did you at any time see any model that says we need to take care of this young mother who has just delivered a child because
No.
she is more disposed to having emotional and mental problems more than any other time in her life?
Nope.
No,
Definitely not. Definitely not.
it's not addressed. It's not addressed. That mother goes on to have her second and her third child. So what are we doing? We're compounding the issue.
Definitely.
It's like an endless cycle. It's like it just keeps on turning.
Absolutely.
Just keeps on
Absolutely.
turning.
And you
You
know
know,
what as well, Clive, you talk about loving and you talk about empathy and stuff like that. A major thing with Jamaican society on a whole is understanding. You know what? I must first say this. You know, we just did that video with Latoya with the thyroid depression. Way long before I understand what depression was. I just felt like somebody was sad and would have eventually get out of it. You know what I mean? You know, you have so much thing to do in the house, go watch a movie, you know, go outside, go take a walk, go to the park, you know, things like that. It was at the point where I saw Latoya physically wasn't capable of doing none of what I felt would have made her happier. That I said, well, really, this is some kind of a sickness, you know what I'm saying? But how many of us, you know, Clive, you talk back about growing up in the Jamaican society. We are at a stage now that we can even understand what's going on. But back then, how many of us had that exposure to understand anything relating to, if somebody mentioned mental health in Jamaica, the world say you're mad.
Mm-hmm.
Who want to
Yeah.
carry on a stigma of being mad?
Yeah.
You know, what level of mental health can you propose to the world for someone to accept you? From you mention mental health in Jamaica, they must send you go as a mental institution.
Yeah.
Bellevue is such a big term in Jamaica. You know what I mean? Just for the fact that if you mention anything other than having five senses, you're a madman.
You know,
So it's about understanding.
just to reinforce your point, Poppy, you know, one of my best friends, whenever I think of this guy, tears come to my eyes because this guy, for those people who know or don't know, you know, I have to mention this. I went to Calabar, which is one of the high schools in Jamaica that is considered top tier. My friend went to Kingston College, which again is considered top tier as a high school.
And I went to Jamaica College.
I went to St.
we
Mary High.
we both became we'll have another conversation on that Papa Show. But we both became kindred spirits, right? We were total opposites. Winston was tall. He was in school at the time. He was at least 6'1", right? He was light skinned. He was what most women, whether they're Jamaican, American, whatever, considers to be the ideal guy, right? Light skinned, tall, I mean, good looking guy. And Winston was my teacher. This guy used to help me with my science and math, right? My dad loved him for that. But my dad also noticed that when he spoke to Winston, Winston was very evasive when my dad asked him about his family life, because my dad wanted to make sure that I was keeping the right company, right? So he inquired about Winston's family life. And Winston was very vague, and my father probed and probed and said, you know what? I want to meet your father. And my dad insisted, and Winston said to him, Mr. Williams, I don't think you want to do that. And my dad says, yes, I got to meet your father. So one evening after school, Winston came by to give me the usual lessons to catch up with my math. And my dad said, I'm going to drop you home. He lived maybe about a mile and a half away from us. And my dad insisted, took him home. And when we got to his gate, my dad says, Where's your family? And that guy was hesitant to even respond. My dad went in. My dad is a very tough kind of guy, very determined. And my dad went in and knocked. And Winston's father came out. My dad introduced himself. And they spoke. And Winston was, we deposited him to his family. And my dad came back in a car, and for a long time on the drive back home, he said maybe 2 words. I realized that he was very preoccupied. The long and short of it was he discovered in the short conversation that he had with Winston's father that Winston was being abused by his dad. We're not talking sexual abuse, I don't know, but physical. I mean, really physically abused, and being abused to the point where he was not getting proper food, he was not getting the clothes he needed, and so forth. Why do I tell that story? Because for the time that Winston, by the way, was extremely brilliant. This guy was, by the time he was in sixth form, he was in a pre-med program at the University of the West Indies. So that is the kind of brilliance we're talking about. Today, that guy is walking the streets of Kingston, stark, raving, unhinged. Why? Because when my dad spoke to him and spoke to his father refused any kind of intervention, any kind of support, any kind of help. My friend was begging, was reaching out for some person capable enough to give him the help he needed. He didn't know what help he needed. So he turned to smoking weed, turned to smoking other stuff. And so today, he's, as a human being, he is demolished, destroyed. I hold that on my mind, not on my conscience, on my mind, that we lived in a society that was so insensitive, so uncaring, so unaware, I think is the best word, so totally unaware, that we should not be surprised as to what is happening today in Jamaican society. And in this society, let me say it's happening 10 times as much when we neglect people who need support. And who do I hold responsible? As much as we hold ourselves responsible, I hold our governments also equally responsible for not providing the kind of support system. We're taxpayers. We are people who vote these people into office. We should hold them responsible too. My last article that I wrote for Where It's At, I spoke about mental health, strongly about mental health. And one of the things I said, society is driving us crazy. And I want you to take that to heart, because if you don't understand that society is literally driving us crazy, then you won't put in place the resources and you won't develop the resilience you need to develop to deal with the societal ills that are besetting us right now.
Absolutely.
I want to take us into a lighter mode. We've been very heavy.
Yeah.
Before you do that, Janet, let me just read this comic. Mothers oftentimes will go above and beyond to make her family comfortable. Kids call them super moms. They make sure of the most difficult decisions. They make some of the most difficult decisions sometimes. All right, Janet, take it away. Welcome to everybody in the chat. Again, if you have any opinions about the topic, please drop it in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to throw it over to Janet to have some fun.
Because it's very heavy. I know I said that we want to have different conversations, but we touched on so many important points tonight. The fact that it's not just a relationship with a mother, but a parent that definitely affects us overall. So we're basically coming together last week and this week in a nice little package. So you have to watch both episodes to get so many different perspectives on how these relationships are really affecting us. Now, Papa Show, you said that you were, the firstborn and all that kind of stuff. Do you think you're your mother's favorite? I'm just putting this out there. Do you think
I was the first son? I was the first son, but I can honestly say I was my mother's favorite. Like,
Okay.
my sisters. I can openly say that my sisters. I have two sisters ahead of me, and I have a younger brother, so it's four of us. And they all talked about it. But let me tell you something. It's pretty much based on through the years that they saw. When they talk about your brother's keeper, I was pretty much my mother's keeper. I remember being in, I think I was in third form at high school. And my mother come from ghetto. My mother went to the embassy. My mother carried my passport alone now, out of all of the four kids. My passport alone, my mother carried. And them turn her down, But the thing about it, when I was at school, I go to school, I tell everybody, say, I get visa. I don't know what the process, I go up on summer holidays and all this stuff. Go home like me so pumped up to go home and boom, no visa. My mother was so disappointed at my disappointment, mind you, my mother and me was like virgin, So as she saw how sad I was, but they gave her a certain amount of time to retry, The next year, my mother tried again, and she carried my passport again. Turned down again, Charles. And I was so devastated now at this point, 2 years in a row. I turned to my mother and said, listen, no, we won't do this anymore. Let me tell you. I took my mother to the embassy, right? I went in there with her in a uniform representing an airline industry and gave my mother a 10-year visa. When I tell you I'm my mother's keeper, that's what I'm talking about. When the lady look at me and said to me, say, so why is it that you would like for your mother? I said, listen, my mother being able to shop on my benefits is the least of anything I could ever do for what my mother has done for me. The lady not even asked me another question. She took passport and that was it. You know what I mean?
How old are you at that point?
At that time, I was 28, I think it was.
Okay. So
yeah, it was 28 at that time. And it not even stopped there. It went on that I eventually filed for my mother to be a resident in the United States. That, you know what I mean? Just the levels of how I saw my mother coming up as a mother, holding on to straws, just so to not have us drown. And know that, listen, she's doing so much with lack of resources, with limited resources. You know what I mean? Listen, me turn man from your picnic. You know what I mean? I was, I just never wanted to see a woman feeling that she needed to provide so much that it really sunk her heart. You know what I say? And we can go further on. My mother passed away, and I can get some emotional vibe in myself. So I just make either Clive take it over or somebody else take it over.
If I can jump in, did you at any time ever consider that you'd do something like that for your dad? That level of sacrifice?
So now that my dad is on his own, I pretty much stepped up to that level right now. My dad was the kind of dad that he never felt, we talk about, if I should turn to my dad and say, Dad, you don't look too well, a red stripe could probably fix it. You know what I mean? He was the kind of person that never need too much support, Not that he would have turned to the red stripe, but he was so self-sufficient as, the typical macho, I'm fine kind of person. He was never the kind of person that I felt that we should have even be concerned about for, not being able to manage himself. You know what I'm saying?
You see the danger in that, though.
Yeah.
You see the danger in that. Because in terms of his mental strength, his resilience, You see, this is one of the things that I want to emphasize to moms. I saw what that mom, her response, as you know, moms often rise way
Usually.
above the level of expectation to provide for their children. What I would ideally like, John, I'm sorry, we're getting serious again, but what I'd really what I'd really like
I'll
to
jump in
see.
when it gets too heavy and do something ridiculous. Don't worry, I'll lighten it up a little bit.
Okay, what I'd really like to see is moms rise to the level where they begin to hold the men more responsible for their roles. Why? Seriously, listen to me carefully. Why aren't our women holding us men more responsible for the roles we play? Why aren't they engaging us more? Like, I never forget. And look, this is not a fairy tale story, but this is my real experience. My mother would say to my father, Willie, I need you to help me to do this. She gave him very clear instructions. They weren't asks. They weren't like, could you do this for me? She says, I need you to do so and so. A very clear and definitive tasking that said, you are the man and I'm assigning you to do this. This is your role. And demand, I grew up and I saw that. But I also saw a respect for his, she never was overwhelming. He was never my dad was an extremely strong guy. Go beyond strong. My dad was literally a tough guy, but he listened to my mom. Why? Because she expected that from him. So I'm asking the question, as I look at women and I look at where women are coming from. Women were, and I'm talking about women of all types, white and black women, had no rights. Okay, so white women got over and they had begun to get rights way before black women. But black women had no rights. Black women had no say in anything. Yet they were the ones responsible for nurturing us and keeping the society strong, the fabric of the society. So why aren't women demanding from their men that you stand to your responsibility, take care of your children, make sure that you bring home not just the bacon, but you take care of the overall responsibilities that you have? No, women are cutting men way too much slack. And if
Um,
I find any fault with women because you have cut men so much slack, including your sons, we have been kind of kind of creating a situation where our boys are getting weaker and weaker and weaker.
I want to speak a little bit on that point that you mentioned, women demanding the men, putting more demands on them to take up their responsibilities. I want to go a little further back because then it also goes back to the upbringing of that man. It goes back to how they
With
were parented. It goes back to how they saw daddy being treated, what daddy used to do, or the lack thereof.
Hmm.
When you become a grown man and you get in a relationship, or you think you're a grown man, and you get into a relationship, and the female says, I need you to show up for my son's soccer game. Um, I need you to show up for your son's graduation. I need you to go play ball with your son. I need you to spend quality time with your son or daughter. They look back and like, well, daddy didn't do that with me. All daddy did was bring home the bacon.
right.
So when you're demanding that from them, a lot of them aren't receptive to that because they're saying that's not what being a father is, because that's not what I saw growing up. So I think it's a little bit more than us demanding or telling them what to do. Essentially, it starts from their upbringing. So I've always said this when it comes on to being a mother of a son or a daughter. it's important what we instill in them from that point, because some might grow up and their thinking might change, and they might realize certain things, but some of them stick with what they learned growing up. They saw daddy getting hit, or they saw mommy getting hit. They grew up thinking, oh, if I love you, then that means I got to put my hands on you a couple times, or I got to do this. So it all depends on how we nurture them from their young, because that we're growing up the next generation. And it's like, when it comes down to my son, I try to make sure that he knows how to show love. He knows what affection looks like. He knows how to treat a female because he sees how his dad treats me. We try to model, and not even model, because this is just us. We're not pretending, but we make sure that they see what love is, what it means to take care of a person, what it means to be there. We make sure as best as we can that their emotional side is also taken care of. Like you mentioned before, we view them as a person. So like, we sit and we have a conversation. My daughter will come to me and be like, Mommy, can I talk to you? And we sit down, we have a conversation about whatever it is that she's experiencing, because as
Absolutely.
you rightly said, they are human beings, and what happens is sometimes they haven't learned the capacity to deal with their emotions yet. They haven't developed that emotional intelligence, so sometimes they act out doing certain things. But as parents, we have to be extra patient and take that time out and say, why are you behaving like this? What's going on here? Let's talk about it. Let's build that type of relationship and that type of environment, so that they're not scared to say, Mommy, this is what happened, or Daddy, this is what happened. They're not scared to express themselves and truly be who they are, because we see them as a person and they don't feel small. They feel like they matter. So it all comes from like that upbringing, and resetting, retraining our brains, because we grew up differently. I grew up differently from how I'm growing my kids as well. But not everybody, when they get to this point, like a light bulb goes off. Some of them stick with that mentality from they were growing up.
Uh,
Um, I
Shar, you
definitely,
made some really profound points. I mean,
I
you made
know.
some very profound points. I mean, what can I tell you? You know,
She's definitely
on
jumping
the
the
matter
gun.
of, huh?
She's definitely jumping the gun, but I don't mind. It's
Yeah,
flowing, efforts. You want to moderate my chat, or the chat rather? I see
I'm sorry.
something coming up.
Uh,
Yeah,
Okay.
there are some comments coming in, so we wanted to.
yes, but some kids grew up without either parents and are doing very well in the world too. Guess it goes to the saying, a village grows a child. Uh, you know something? There, there's a lot more to life than we understand.
Mhm.
I like to use the phrase, we're more than we think we are. And there's more out there than we understand. Let me bring that metaphysical kind of argument to some kind of practicality. The children that grow up without any parents and do well, I understand the question. I understand the the thought behind the question. But what percentage of those? If we are going to put that out there, then give me a percentage of how many children who grew up without parents are successful. It- there are, in fact. But you know what? They are such an infinitesimal amount of children that grew up without parents that do well. Such an infinitesimal amount that we cannot use that as an example or a model or an excuse. They are just too small. Unfortunately, the world is a jungle. And those children who have grown up without parents and have done well because either they had role models who took the place of parents. But there's another aspect of it. I happen to be a believer that the universe provides for us the same way that, as you read in the Bible, the lilies of the field, they look absolutely beautiful, right? They want for nothing. The birds of the air, they fly. They do nothing but fly and glide and look pretty, yet they're fed. I believe that the universe does support us as a life form. I believe that there is another hand out there that is constantly supporting us on our journey. Having said that, I don't want to get into the whole esoteric thing of religion and so forth. But what I will say, I just speak for that small number of people who succeed without parenting. But unfortunately, here are the sad reality.
Mm-hmm.
Children who grow up in a single parent family have the least likely chance to succeed in this very competitive world. There
That's so
are many that succeed, many that succeed, but
mm-hmm.
not enough to make the difference that we want to make as people of color, Black people. We want to make sure that our children are supported as much as possible. And as Shar says, she has begun to change the model, she has begun to change the paradigm. So, what we need to do is in our own individual lives begin to change the paradigm. That's the only way it will change. And once we begin this process of change, we're talking about it. So, we're making it whenever we use words the way we're using words, it actually comes to pass. So what we're doing is speaking into reality the fact that we need change in our communities. Not everybody is going to be a married couple. Marriage doesn't fit everybody, but at least we should be talking about committed people. if
Mm-hmm.
if you are a father of a child or children, be committed to the welfare of those children. We're not asking you necessarily to be married. And this is where I think we need to step back a little bit. We're talking to people, you got to be married, you got to be married. No, no. A tremendous number of children have come in well, look at the divorce rate. It's 55%. How many of those children are left in the cold? So the reality is we're talking about commitment. The commitments that those father who separate from their wives has is that they're held liable either by the court or by their consciences that they have got to take care of the needs of their family.
Absolutely.
And since our good friend here, Shar, jumped right ahead, um, I want to kind of ask you a quick question about you and your mom, because I know I'm digging into your business a little bit. That you guys both are in the same household, and so you
Mhm.
have a relationship with your mother. And how does that translate between you and your daughter, having three generations of women in the same home? You know, you being raised by her and your father figures, of course, and you changing that relationship with your child. You know, how does that dynamic work? And I mean, what are some of the great things, aka cooking, that really helps the bonding of that?
Um, I think okay, having a child for myself and becoming a mom, I think I going through on a daily basis, I see every day the differences between my parenting and her parenting. And again, the different times as well, different circumstances, because I have access to a lot more than my mom did, right? Even though growing up as a child, I never lacked anything. But when it comes on to my kids too, and I don't spoil them, but my view on certain things is so different. Because if, let's say, for example, you remember you're growing up, you broke a glass, it was like you broke the entire buffet of glasses and they need to replace every single one of them. my approach when if my daughter breaks something, I'm like, you know, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You know, stuff happens and I clean it up and I move on. Complete difference in parenting because you don't get a complete scolding for breaking that glass, even though it was an accident. But for me, I'm like, no, it's an accident. It's okay. Don't be afraid. Let's just clean it up and move on. So every day, I kind of see the differences in our parenting style. I tend to be a little bit softer too when it comes on to correction. I do have my moments, but I will be like, come here. What is it? I talk more. Um, as opposed to just rushing to be like just snapping and giving them a whooping or whatever, because when I talk they literally start crying and I'm not even shouting. Like they literally know, like, mommy is serious, like I did something wrong. They literally start, they're like, mommy, please, I'm sorry, before I even mention, and I'm just sitting down and I'm saying, come here, literally. So
So
I
does it
see.
go back to the point where Papa Show was saying earlier that our kids are not necessarily exposed? And I'm gonna say our kids because your kids are my kids no matter what. So
Exactly.
our kids are just not being given the rough tough of things because just by saying a word and there's
Listen,
the house in the, in the place. Like seriously, how does that even work? It's a command. Come here.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
make us your ass or anything like that.
yeah,
literally
yeah.
come here because I want to talk to you. Come right here.
It's just come here.
I tell you,
But
it has
to your point, Papa Sure, these kids need Papa Summers back in Jamaica, with Auntie so and so another
I don't
country.
think they can handle it though.
They would
This
not handle it.
honestly, I don't
With
think they can
iPad,
handle it.
seriously, without an iPad, like when I think of my upbringing, I was raised with mother, auntie, grandmother, everybody. There was a lot of mothering. There was a lot of discipline. I wasn't a bad child, thank God. But when it comes to that adult relationship between mothers and their daughters, like I said earlier, it's trying. And a lot of people, when they get older, a lot of things repressed and otherwise come to the surface because now you're an adult, you feel the need to speak out. You feel the need to kind of express those things that you thought weren't fair as a child. How come you did give so and so the bigger piece of chicken 19 whenever when I was the one that was sick? I don't know. Do people do that? Like talk about the one time they probably give XYZ the big piece of chicken when you didn't look fit. I don't know. I'm just asking this question.
I never
Well,
had that problem. I was an older child.
that, that, that provokes me.
That was
That,
you.
that,
Okay.
that provokes me to really, that provokes me now to ask Papa Show something, because when you listen to the relationship that Papa Show had with his mom, I
Right?
mean, it's amazing. Let me ask you this, Papa Show, are you the tallest boy in the family?
Yeah, well, yeah, we're a family of what, six? Mom, dad, and four kids.
Are you the
My
tallest boy?
But yeah, because my the other one is, yeah, he's younger than me, he's shorter than me. But
Are,
the thing
are
about
you
it,
are you
I,
are you the lightest in terms of skin tone?
no,
You're not.
my younger brother is lighter than me, and my sister that I follow is lighter than me.
Okay. What is a factor do you think that created this
So
bond between yourself and your mom?
and that's what I can say to you. I think ever since I was born, my mother have stories about never even feeling labor to have me. I just took on this role as a defender for my mom. And the thing about it, when Johnny talk about the other siblings feeling some type of way, my siblings actually embraced me being that because they saw how defensive or how protective I was of mom.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
always knew that if there was a situation that arise, Ian will handle it. Those kind of things.
yeah, yeah.
I was the third child and I filed for her. You know what I mean? Both all my siblings are overseas. Granted, it was partially with one of my other sisters, But I was the one that took initiative. You know, when we're going to the embassy, I was the one that, you know, if we're going to the doctor, I'm driving her. I'm calling you. This is okay. You know, this needs to be done, mom. This, that. You know,
Yep.
she's in America, lived at my house. You know, it's just the relationship that I don't know. Ever since I was born, she have this thing that, you know, I don't know. We take it out, and my siblings embrace that. Me being her little Power Ranger, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
Which
Me wear the
color?
box with them are the red one and the blue one, them others, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
you know, I mean that must have done wonders for your self confidence and you know,
Yeah,
your view of life.
true.
Hey, Clive, let me tell you something, man. I remember I was getting married. I only married one time. Everybody know my wife, that's all, right? And my wife was overseas and I was in Jamaica. I worked with an airline at the time. I was like, we were always flying back and forth. It was no issue. But I understand how the immigration policy works as it relates to the time that you get married, coming over, and how it works with, you know,
Yeah,
filing paperwork, things like that. So when I got married, I was still living in Jamaica. I was running a music studio. I was working with airlines. It wasn't a problem, back and forth, all that kind of stuff, just to travel because, you know, we could have done that. And I remember one day I was talking to Latoya on the phone prior to getting married, and she was having some issues with some bank situation, sending some money out for me to handle some business because the bank was trying, you know, more money laundering and stuff like that. My mother walked past my door, overhear the conversation, and the next thing I know, my mother put the how much $100,000 right beside me and tell my wife, said, don't worry about it when married gone and everything and whatever. This is the, you know, listen, let me tell you, say relationship like,
yeah,
let
yeah.
me tell you, when I filed for my mother, let me just give you this. Because I feel like I'm not going to cry. You know, she tell me something.
Tell her if you
Hey,
care
Clive, let me
something.
tell you.
Tell her if you care
Yes,
something, just in case.
no, we're good, man. We're good.
We're good.
Hey, Clive, when I filed for my mother, you know, mother green card come through and everything, and I say, oh, more hide the green card. I just don't want her to go back, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Me just want money beside me and everything, you know. My dad is there and everything, you know. Make sure them talk on the phone, video call, this, that, blah, 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 you know. And I said, Mommy, why you want to go back, man? Never file for daddy too, man. Where, you know, everything, you know. She want to go back. It's her place, you know. She want to sit on the roadside and see her friends walking up and down. She want to see auntie this and uncle
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
I couldn't really hold her back. Clive, let me tell you, my mother went to Jamaica on the 8th of September. It was the last time I saw my mother alive. Last
Wow.
day of December 2019. I got a phone call 10:13 at the night that my mother just suffered a heart attack and died. I'm gonna tell you, say, Clive, trust me, it's just thinking about her now that brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah,
I went to my mother's funeral and I never even cried. I was so appeased with myself to know that I did so much for a mother. You know what I mean? I
yeah,
said to
sure.
myself, if there was anybody that has to go to God and say, God, I have a report on a child, and you have to look at this report, is my mother. You know what I say? That's how I
Yep.
felt like when God took my mother. I said, God, it pleases you to take my mother away. But I know if there's anything that I'm needing from the realm, you know, nobody understands what goes on beyond that life. But if there's any truth to a guardian angel, I could not want anybody else to represent me than my mother. And I felt so powerful in the world that I live now to know that there is somebody else in another place, whether it's that way or not, you know, I'm so covered. I'm gonna tell you, like, Clive, it's just when I sit back and think about things that I achieve after she's gone, and I'm saying, boy, I wish if mommy could have been here to just enjoy some of this. That really brings tears to my eyes. But if I should tell you that I have any shortfalls as it relates to how I should have treated, no man, me do more than 2 lifetimes for your mother. You know?
Papa Sure, can I ask you something?
Yeah, man.
In the context of the Jamaican lifestyle that I say used to live, how many men could you really have that kind of emotional conversation with?
No, zero.
Okay,
Honestly, I tell
okay,
you, like the way
okay.
I grow my boys now, listen, I am like Latoya can tell you, me had the pride I'm gonna pick me them. Because you see the way how me embrace Latoya to them and have them embrace them own mother is just that the same way, you know, I I feel like I'm gonna tell everybody, I said, listen, I truly understand now losing a mother that the only way to not be so grievous in yourself after losing any parent is to just kill them with the love, man. Just show them that, listen, you're so appreciative of them, doing all that they did for you, no matter what the circumstances were, Clive, if I tell you how I feel within myself after my mother's passing, just to understand the kind of kid I was to my mother,
Yeah.
it makes me so joyful, you know what I'm saying? But not too much, boys. Men have that similar perspective of a mother-son's relationship.
That's right.
When Shara and I discussed the list of topics that you guys were gonna put out there, I quickly jumped on and said, listen, this is the one that I want because it just resonates with me as a human being. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
When it comes on to my mother, like literally in every room there's a picture of her. Sometimes I don't believe in the dopey thing and the ghost thing and
Yeah.
say, mommy, just show me yourself. No, or just I don't know. It's just listen, it's an amazing feeling, after her life on earth here, for me to feel the way I feel within myself. It's just an amazing feeling, honestly.
Brother, it is
for you, right?
for me, having this conversation with you is as powerful as the emotion you feel, because it is almost impossible to relate to another male with respect to family, love, relationship, and life. And that is part of the demise of the black male.
Yeah,
The
absolutely
black
right.
female, the black female who is light years ahead of us. I'm going to tell you, women are ahead of us. Men don't want to accept that. They've been more mature than us from in school. I knew that the girl always had the power, the foresight, the ability to lead you. Women need to understand the power that they have. Look, women don't need to seek power, and I'm gone off on another tangent because of the inspiration of his mother. Women have all the power they need. What they need to begin to do more of is assert that power, but with love, with compassion, with empathy. Not bully the guy, okay? Because you're brighter than the guy, because you make more money than the guy. Don't bully him. Bring him along. A man is not hard to deal with. We all have, and this is a general kind of statement. Now, when you whittle it down to individuals, yes, they're problem child. I mean, all over the place, they're problem men. But what I'm saying to women at large is that you have the capacity, the ability to guide your man. You do have that power. And I'm saying rise to that occasion and begin to tell the man what you need, rather than the man just sitting back waiting for applause. The fact is that not only my mother, I've seen other people's lives, because I've had the opportunity to look into other people's lives and see how successful relationships work. And successful relationships work when the woman takes on herself the responsibility of holding the man accountable, holding him accountable at every time. There are times when he needs support, emotional support. Give it to him when he needs it. There are times he needs financial support. If you're able to give it to him as long as he is bearing the responsibility and the accountability that a man should bear. And not many of us do that.
You touched on a couple of things. Accountability, one, is a big deal in a lot of relationships, not just even romantic relationships. A lot of us don't hold ourselves accountable in a lot of spaces. And I think in certain relationships, are we vulnerable enough to be open to accepting that? Because when it comes to being that person, you have to kind of be like, all right, cool, let me tone down my bad boy self and talk about how I feel, and then own that feeling, because at the end of the day, it's what I'm feeling. It's not necessarily the truth about the situation. And so, there's so many layers on top of layers that we have to kind of peel and dig deep into what makes what works. But you said a good point. How can we hold them accountable if
Yeah, but
but
Janet, there are layers. But what's the intention when you
that's
meet a
what I'm
man?
asking.
What
Like
what?
if you're in a relationship and the man is not open to being vulnerable to even address certain things in that particular, you cannot just say, oh, hold them accountable if they're not open to the conversation. Some people will shut it down, and like Shar said, they go back to say, oh, but I wasn't raised that way. My mother didn't teach me this. My father didn't teach me this. I didn't see this in my upbringing, so I'm not going to even entertain the thought of even being open to this accountability crap. What is this?
They
Let me.
also say
Yes,
one more
sure.
thing. They say one more thing. They say, I turned out fine.
Yes.
You what?
I turned out fine, and my
Yes.
parents would do that.
Right.
Okay.
There is a
Let's.
mentality thing that it comes to the point where that person has to be open and willing enough to even say, hey,
When do we
happen.
when do we know this? When do we know? In other words, do we have some prerequisites here? Do we have
I
some
mean,
standards
dating
by
against
which?
your dad
So
is
in the courtship phase, right? And I say courtship because it could just be a friendship. But
mm-hmm.
everything, birds court, animals court all the time. What they do, they use their sense of smell. They use their whatever senses that particular animal has developed to find a compatible partner or partners. You have a detection device within you that
I agree.
your prerequisite is that you need a man. I remember being in therapy with a client who said to me that her preference is for us the strong silent type in describing the man that she liked. Yet her
Mm.
big complaint was that
Was
the
like,
man wouldn't talk to her.
sir, okay, all
Okay.
right.
So
Yes,
Okay,
I
guys.
asked you. So
She
I
needs
asked you,
therapy.
why did she marry him? Why did she
because
why did she marry him? What are
wait, hold on a second.
She does need therapy.
yeah?
I don't want us to go too far because you know what? Let's save that for another time.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
coming.
It is
coming.
definitely coming because while we're talking about the foundation of our relationships, meaning the parents, the people that we, that's are supposed to raise us to be the people in society that we go out to be, a lot of us
Yeah.
don't have that opportunity to have both parents. Some of us have grandparents, aunts, and uncles that raised us, and we all turned out fine. Come to be honest, we still need therapy. No shade. We all still need to iron out a bunch of little things that we don't think they're traumatic episodes, but they are. But we're, acknowledging that they exist. We are talking about those things that we feel that though we thought they were okay because it was a norm, we are now bringing them to the forefront. And so when
Yeah.
other people recognize that, hey, maybe this wasn't so normal after all, because when you
Yeah.
get used to something, it becomes, okay, all right, this is life. And then you're like, oh, wait, this is not life. This is not exactly how it was supposed to be at
Yeah.
all. And I kind of blame that too on colonialism and the history of that and what we were forced, or families were given after slavery ended. We weren't given anything. We were taken, we were thrust into a lifestyle that we had to recreate our own. So now we're at a point in our evolution, if I may use that word,
Yeah.
where we have access. We have access, we have education that we weren't allowed to have. And so having these hard conversations, having these talks really definitely help us to kind of give our people voice to their problems. It's not just a random situation where we're saying, okay, my mother is great. I love my mother. Our relationship is okay most of the time, but we learn as we go along. One of the things I tell my people all the time, I love to see my mother as a human because nobody's perfect. we all have different relationships over time with different people. I am my mother's daughter. No joke. Like I said last week, I'm like the perfect combination of both my parents, which is a blessing creatively and otherwise. So I just want to ask if you all have any. We want to wind down the night. We've been going on for a while, and we could go on and on and on. I'm sure all of us could go on for the rest of the night, but we want to be able to save some of this good stuff for future shows because we're having these conversations. They're easy to have sometimes because we're having them with emotionally mature people who understand the concepts, who can give us, incredible experience and insight, and who can be a little bit quirky when needs be, when it gets, a little bit too
Yeah.
AKA Janet.
right.
I,
So,
I'll just
do you
I'll
have any
just
last
say,
words?
yeah, I'll just say, uh, as much as I sometimes privately, I'm a little bit critical and even hypercritical
Hmm.
of the condition of my black people that I love so much. When I am more objective, when I'm sane, when I'm balanced, I realize that our our story with ourselves has been a short one.
Hmm. That's
When
right.
I was in high school, I was not allowed to read the real story of colonization, colonialism. Do you realize that our books were literally censored and neutered so that we didn't know the correct story?
Nope.
I met a teacher at Calabar, a male teacher, whom I adore to this day. He's no longer with us. But Abbott Anderson referred me to a book and he told me to have my father get that book. And I got that book. For about 3 months, for a term, I was the brightest guy in history in the fourth form in school. Why? Because I got information from that book that we never saw in our curriculum at school. Why do I make that point? I think we should be kinder to ourselves and more patient with ourselves because 64 was a civil rights bill in the United States.
Yeah.
Black people didn't, or still to this day, don't even know what occurred in their stories. We're just beginning to learn.
Hmm.
So, as you said, valid word, evolving. We are evolving. And we are at a point where knowledge is just now so available, especially through the internet, that
Hmm.
we can now ramp up our game and begin the same rapidity with which technology has come upon us. We can use that, the speed of technology, to fast forward our game. We can really elevate our game because we have a tremendous advantage over a lot of other folks who are so complacent, who are steeped in so much hate that they don't have time to advance and develop the kind of development that you spoke about, the emotional intelligence. They are not there. And we emotional intelligence is built in us because of the burden that we have borne through our lives. So I think we can ramp up and we can begin to share this knowledge and share this knowledge so that we can begin to emphasize to our brothers and sisters that look, your mindset, your mentality is
Hmm.
your most important asset. And the entire motive of the system is to get your mind. Don't let them do that. And that's
In your
where I,
mind,
I would end my,
Poppy.
Janet again.
yeah.
So what I would really like to say is it's a combination of probably all three of you touched on bits of this that really puts it together. I think where Clive said, women should really hold men accountable. Clive, I'm 100% behind you. Believe me, because I often say some of them women I empower them craft money. You know what I mean?
Thank you,
But
sir.
I can also say, when you talk about the woman having more power than they really understand that they have, I think it goes all the way back to being in the household. I think a woman, as a mother, can really raise her boy child to be a better husband in the future, a
Yeah,
better accountable man in the future.
yeah,
You know?
yeah,
It's like you're putting out there a security guard, but when Shara get him, she want a soldier. Him not
Sure.
get that and him quite fine, as per Shara would I say, I'm fine. I turned out okay with him little button. Him no want no AK-47. You know what I mean? Him quite fine with him little dog by him side. Shara want him go up in a bunker and fly helicopter and all these things.
With the tie pad. And then I go back.
Yeah, I wasn't trained on that, my girl. I'm fine. I turned out okay. I can still provide. You know, I think the training has to come from a farther way than just Shara getting him or Janet getting him or Taya getting him. Because I'm telling you, the training I got from my mother, both subconscious and consciously, it
yeah,
really propelled me to be that military person for just to use it in the terminology. A general in the army, you understand what I mean? I say, I feel
yeah,
powerful on the battlefield where my son them can say, yo, let me stand up behind dad because it's a true general out here. You understand what I mean? So I think it really can come from a little further back than the woman getting him the one say, listen, you need to be accountable when they were not trained on how to be accountable, don't even know what the meaning of accountable is because they are fine. You know what I mean? And that's my 2 cents, really.
Charlene, you have 2 cents? Do you have 2 cents?
Huh?
You have 2
Just spend all
oh,
right.
yeah.
Oh my God, probably spent all
I'll
the
just say, I'm gonna say, I really enjoyed the conversation tonight, though. It's truly a privilege to have a conversation, um, that has so much depth. You can tell the emotional intelligence in the room, and also, the intelligence in general when it comes on to talking about this and our experiences and stuff like that. So I really appreciate this conversation and actually sitting here and actually absorbing and learning as well when we're having these conversations. And I hope the listeners, we're viewing on 3 different platforms, guys, and I hope each and every one of you took something from this conversation. 4 different platforms, sorry. I hope each of you took something from this conversation, and you can rewatch it, and let's internalize some of these things that we're talking about. Let's change the narrative. Let's not be because this is how I grew up, this is how I'm going to be for the rest of my life. Let's really sit down and look into yourself and see what it is that might need changing, what might need improvement. And again, like we've always said, if you need counseling, seek counseling. There's no shame in it. There's nothing wrong with going and sitting down and talking about your feelings and expressing your emotions and actually getting help working through them and processing them. Because even though you might think you're okay, sometimes we're not okay. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with admitting that I'm not okay and I need to talk to somebody, because they're there for a reason. They're there because there are people in this world that actually need that extra help, that extra guidance, that extra assistance in order to, find their true self and, work out certain emotions and certain past traumas that we do have. So yeah, that's my 1 cent.
So we got 3 cents tonight, and there's a whole lot of broad for this show because we were only supposed to be here for an hour. You guys got an hour and maybe 45 minutes of
Yeah.
amazing, amazing conversation and feedback. So I would love for you guys to come back and join us next week. Next week, we started that conversation. Next week, our topic is why didn't he marry me? Marriage and singledom.
Oh Lord.
Okay.
But
Okay.
it's worth it. So we are gonna talk about that next week, and I'd love for you guys to send those questions on IG or here. We'd love to get some questions in. Tara have one. There's one comment that came in right at the cusp. It says some parents are slaves to tradition and refuse to employ a different methodology to really teach their children, and we agree. And we might have a part two. Might keep that. How can we help those parents steeped in tradition kind of understand new ways of parenting? How can we? I mean, it's just a thought too. How can we reparent our parents? How is that a thing? Can we parent our parents and reparent them to really understand, things? So while we're thinking about marriage and singledom, we're also thinking about, giving our parents some insight into new ways into treating their adult children and children as human beings, because that's what it is. So this is Let's Speak on It though, but we're gonna be talking on it. We're speaking on it. We're speaking a lot.
If you let Janet continue, we will be.
I know we will be here.
Hours.
And Tara wants us to do a part two, so we'll definitely try to schedule a part two. But please join us next week for Why Didn't He Marry Me? Married in Singledom. Is the chase for the ring worth it? So if you want to join us,
conversation.
That's powerful.
Yeah. If you want to join us, let us know. Hit us up on the DM on IG, Shard GLOWUP, or the Meat Chronicles, or where it's at, and we'll definitely try to get you on the show. But thank you guys for coming, and have a good night and have a great weekend.
Thanks for the privilege. One love.
One love.
All right, guys. Thanks.